Hey guys, tonight we drift back way back into the chilly dusk of the Stone Age. The air is thick with the smell of damp moss and wood smoke. You're crouched inside a high draped hut, your breath curling into the air as the fire flickers low. Something's off. Your limbs feel heavy, your head pulses like it's been clobbered with a very small but very persistent mammoth. You don't know the words for fever or infection. Frankly, you don't even know about germs. But you do know you're not well. And the healer is out collecting snail shells. Brilliant. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you. Bonus points if it's past midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes close slowly as we settle into life over 10,000 years ago, somewhere between the end of the last ice age and your next nap. Humans are just beginning to settle in little groups, trading caves for huts and learning the wonders of forgetting where they buried the leftovers. There are no calendars, no clocks, no TikToks. Just the rhythm of the sun, the mood of the clouds, and the general sense that winter is always roughly 6 minutes away. You get sick. But what does that even mean? Without thermometers, symptom charts, or the internet to convince you, you've got medieval plague. Illness feels like a fog creeping in. Maybe you wake up dizzy. Maybe you stop craving roots. Maybe you can't keep down the roasted squirrel. And that's saying something, because it's squirrel. Still, even without modern know-how, ancient people weren't clueless. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans were surprisingly attentive to the signs of illness. Historians still argue whether they recognized diseases as separate from spiritual malaise, or just saw it all as one bad energy party. But bones tell stories, limbs that broke and healed joints worn from age or toil, and skulls bearing marks of deliberate cuts, suggesting people lived through treatment attempts. You feel pain, of course. Pain is universal. It's the body's charming way of saying, this was a bad idea. And in a world without aspirin, pain was a language. A limp might suggest a fall during hunting. A swollen jaw might mean you've been chewing too much bark, or not enough. Pain told stories the tribe needed to read. Your grandmother, if she's still around, probably knows a few tricks. She's seen people recover from strange fevers and stranger accidents. She might rub something pungent onto your forehead, or hum low while waving dried herbs over your chest. Is it medicine? Is it ritual? Yes, the lines between healing habit and hope were blurred mostly because drawing lines in the dirt is hard when it's raining again. Healing involved touch, sound, warmth, and watching. It involved a sort of primal intuition, noticing what plants seemed to help, what foods triggered vomiting, what times of year people got sick, and perhaps most importantly, who survived, because survival itself was the data. No spreadsheets, just living memory. Remember last winter when old Hargle ate the purple fungus? Didn't end well. That's science, really. Just don't eat the Hargle fungus. It's not all herbal tea and sympathy, though. You probably won't survive this. Sorry. Stone Age mortality rates were brutal. Children often didn't make it past 5. A scratch could turn into an infection, and there were no antibiotics hiding behind a fern. And if you had something serious, like a burst appendix, Your odds dropped faster than a mammoth on a frozen pond. Still, people tried. The instinct to help others through pain, through uncertainty, is ancient. You might be wrapped in fur, laid near the fire, and offered a thick stew made from roots someone's convinced are magical. You might hear soft chants or rhythmic tapping. You might fall asleep listening to the rustling of feathers tied to a healer's staff. You might, if lucky, wake up slightly better, or at least still breathing. The moment of illness becomes a community affair. You, the afflicted, become both burden and barometer. Your suffering marks the tribe's knowledge boundary. Every cough, every rash, every success or failure of treatment adds one more cautious brushstroke to the picture of prehistoric healthcare. Sometimes someone just disappears into the woods, quietly. That's another form of treatment denial, or maybe mercy, or honestly, just poor trail signage. And through it, all night falls. The stars blink into view. You lie still, stomach swirling, head hot heart, pounding in a body that hasn't yet learned to fear germs, but deeply resents that funny smelling stew. Around you, life continues. The fire is fed. The healer returns with a sack of mystery bark, and the long, slow mystery of Stone Age illness continues. Your eyes flutter open to the soft orange of firelight bouncing off animal hide walls. You're still feverish, and now worse, your leg hurts. Not an annoying sort of hurt, like stepping on a cold pebble barefoot. No, this is the throbbing, bone-deep sort that suggests you did something stupid near a ledge. Again, in the Stone Age, broken bones are a family affair. Someone saw you fall, probably laughed. Stone Age. Humor is delightfully cruel, then dragged you back to camp. No ambulances, no splints, ready-made, just the steady hands of your cousin who once fixed a bird's wing by shouting at it. But surprisingly, some of them get it right. Archaeological finds show healed fractures, properly aligned ones, which means your ancestors weren't just grunting and giving up. They set bones with sticks, wrapped limbs with grass rope, even braced breaks using bark. All very charming until you remember there's no anesthetic. Not even a sip of something strong. Just grit your teeth, bite a bit of leather, and scream into the void like a true Neolithic hero. The healer arrives dragging something between a walking stick and a ladle. You're half expecting her to boil your leg. But instead, she squats beside you, muttering a lullaby that somehow sounds like a warning. She pokes your leg, not gently, and nods. Classic healer behavior, no bedside manner, but at least she's not waving a burning stick just yet. Historians still argue whether these treatments were based on systematic knowledge or simply decades of wild guessing paired with confirmation bias. Probably both. Break a leg, wrap it in moss, and if you survive, it becomes gospel. If you don't, well, no one's taking notes. Sprains and bruises were more manageable. You'd be told to rest, which usually meant sitting near the fire and trying not to move anything essential. Someone might massage you with animal fat, either for the pain or because they misunderstood what massage is. You might be decorated with ochre, or left outside in moonlight for healing light. The line between medicine and performance art is thin, and in the Stone Age, it's mostly erased. Then there are dislocations. Think of that one uncle always trying to wrestle a boar now, with a shoulder pointing in 3 directions. The remedy: yank it back. Quick. Possibly while holding your breath and whistling through your nose. Prehistoric accounts don't exist, of course. But if you've ever tried to reattach a dislocated limb with zero medical training and a strong belief in tree bark, you know it involves a lot of hopeful grunting. Interestingly, ancient humans were also keen observers of animals. If a bear limped and later got better after licking its wound and lying in mud, well, guess who's getting a mud bath tomorrow? This wasn't dumb mimicry, it was practical. They saw patterns, tried them out, and remembered what didn't kill people, mostly. There's something strangely beautiful about this experimental healing. You don't have much choice, but your friends, or what counts as friends, when you all smell like smoked rabbit, try anyway. Someone fetches water from a stream. Another sits beside you, bored humming tunelessly while pretending not to worry. Even the kids come to stare. One pokes your toe. You growl. They run. It's communal medicine at its finest. And bones tell us a lot. There's a famous 31,000-year-old skeleton found in Borneo, a young man who had his lower left leg amputated as a child and survived for years afterward. Historians still debate whether this was an accidental trauma or deliberate surgery, but either way, it implies care. Long-term care. They kept him alive, fed, protected. That's not just a lucky break. It's empathy with a flint knife. Of course not. Everyone gets this treatment. If you're the tribe. Nuisance always interrupting hunts to comment on the clouds. Well, your limp might earn you a pat on the head and a gentle shove towards the forest. But for most illness or injury is met with some form of compassion. Limited compassion, but compassion. And then there's the classic walk it off. A limp isn't necessarily a sign to stop. It's a sign to walk slightly differently. If you can hobble, you're still useful. Maybe not on the front line of mammoth chasing, but you can sharpen tools, scare birds, tell stories. Everyone's got a job, even the broken-legged. Over time you adjust. The pain shifts from searing to dull. You lean on a stick made lovingly or grudgingly by someone who once tripped over your sleeping body. You become the hobbling philosopher of the camp, muttering weather predictions and loudly complaining about damp moss. You survive somehow. And when the next cousin breaks an ankle, you're the one mumbling advice, pointing to your own warped shin as proof. Healing in the Stone Age isn't precise. It's not even always helpful, but it's persistent, and occasionally it works. So as the fire pops and your leg begins to ache in that deeply familiar way, you settle into the smoke and silence. You're not alone. You're injured, but you're here, wrapped in fur, resting near warmth, still muttering about that ledge. The rain begins again, of course. It always does. A slow, relentless drizzle that finds its way through thatch fur and your last remaining dry toe. You're lying on a patch of flattened reed's leg, still tender, but now it's your elbow that's acting up. Swollen, itchy, and suspiciously green-tinted. You suspect the healer's special paste might have been more experimental than helpful. Poultices. The Stone Age equivalent of, have you tried turning it off and on again? You don't quite know what's in it. Nobody does really, but it's wet. It smells like despair and turnips, and someone insists it works. That someone has been chewing moss all morning and whispering to a tortoise shell, but still, you're trying to be open-minded. The use of natural materials for healing was everywhere. People rubbed mud onto stings, stuffed open wounds with moss, and mashed up herbs into goopy spreads that looked vaguely like something scraped off a mammoth's armpit. If it stuck, it worked. If it didn't, you at least felt productive. Historians still argue whether these concoctions had medicinal value or just kept flies off. Some plants definitely had healing properties: yarrow for bleeding willow bark for pain relief. The tricky part was knowing which was helpful and which caused hallucinations followed by death. Trial and error was the name of the game, and error was frequent. You eye your elbow again. The paste is drying into a crust, bits of fern stuck in it like strange confetti. A small beetle wanders across. Maybe it's part of the cure. Maybe it's just passing through. Either way, it's a good metaphor for Stone Age medicine, always crawling towards something useful, not always successfully. Let's be honest, no one in the camp really understands why any of it works, but they do it anyway. Your aunt, who smells of wet goat and wisdom, insists she saw a wolf lick this exact moss off its paw before outrunning a deer. That's irrefutable science. In 6000 BCE, sometimes it's about heat. Stones warmed in the fire are wrapped in hide and pressed against sore limbs. Not quite a spa day, but soothing in a please don't burn me sort of way. Other times, it's about cold dunking swollen joints in a stream until you lose feeling in both your injury and your dignity. And then there's the mysterious habit of burying things near the sick. A bit of charred wood, a broken bead, the left toe of a bird. These aren't just decorations. They're offerings, distractions, or charms meant to draw out the illness. You've woken up more than once to find a small rock tucked into your armpit. Nobody explains. Nobody removes it. You're just supposed to be grateful. The healer eventually returns to check on her concoction. She pokes at your elbow with a stick, sniffs the air above it, and mutters something about too much river in your spirit. She then pulls out a handful of crushed insects and a wad of chewed bark. You pretend to be asleep. It doesn't help. Yet, miracle of moss, you do feel a bit better. The swelling's down, the green hue has faded to a more fashionable yellow, and the itch has receded to a manageable annoyance. Maybe it was the poultice. Maybe it was time. Maybe your immune system is the real MVP here, quietly working overtime, while everyone else smears gunk on your limbs. There's also communal belief at play. If everyone around you believes the fern paste works, your mind leans into it. You feel cared for, supported, maybe even hopeful. And sometimes that's enough. Placebo isn't a modern invention. It's just belief without branding. And poultices were only part of the medicine show. There were smokes burning herbs waved under your nose to clear the head or chase out the sickness. You once spent an entire morning with smoke in your face because someone said it would make your cough run away. It did technically, along with your sense of smell and several eyelashes. Then there's spit. Saliva was the multi-tool of healing, mixed with ash smeared on wounds or spat ceremonially onto the ground. It had power. Or at least it was free. Nothing says Stone Age triage like being lightly dribbled on by a well-meaning elder. Of course, some materials worked better than others. Honey, for instance, might have been used for its antibacterial properties if it was available. Animal fat created barriers over cuts. Clay helped draw out infection or at least blocked the view of it. And certain plants had enough chemical kick to make a difference, though sometimes that difference involved explosive gastrointestinal regret. You remember a fellow tribesperson, Letu maybe, who once used crushed berries on a snake bite. The swelling vanished. So did Letu's eyebrows. But he lived. And from then on, those berries were sacred. possibly cursed, definitely berry shaped. Eventually, you start to appreciate the theater of it all. The whispered chants, the bizarre ingredients, the ritual rubbing of fish bones across your forehead. It's care wrapped in mystery. And even if the science is shaky, the sentiment is solid. Someone's trying to help. Someone's choosing to smear fermented badger milk on your rash instead of walking away. Night settles again. Your elbow, now poultice free, is wrapped in soft bark and tied with twine. The pain's faded to a dull echo, and your dreams are strange but peaceful. You drift off, imagining a world where people still use mud to heal, but maybe with fewer beetles. The fire crackles low as dawn peeks over the treetops, grey and indifferent. You're awake again, sort of. Your elbows stiff, your leg itches, and you've been chewed on by something small and determined in the night. Probably a vole, possibly the healer's pet. She's already up, of course, squatting by the embers, stirring a pot of something that smells like wet socks and hope. She's the closest thing your camp has to a doctor, a curious blend of scavenger soothsayer and part-time dentist. Though her dental tools are a stick and a bit of string, and her definition of soothing involves loud humming, every community had someone like her. The healer. Not quite a leader, not quite a loner. Usually older. Always a bit odd. The one who collects bird bones and mutters to the moon, but also knows which mushrooms won't kill you. Probably. Historians still argue whether these figures were chosen self-declared or simply tolerated because they smelled strongly of mint and nobody wanted to argue. Some think they passed down knowledge orally through chant stories or suspiciously detailed bedtime tales. Others suspect it was all trial and error with a hefty dose of inherited weirdness. She comes over now, her necklace jangling a collection of beads' teeth and one very small hoof. She waves a hand over you and clicks her tongue. It means you're still alive in healer speak. Then she sprinkles ash around your mat and pokes your foot. Progress. Healers weren't just nurses. They were the community's health archive experimental chefs, grief counselors, and part-time meteorologists. If someone had a fever, they'd be called. If someone gave birth, they'd be summoned. If someone coughed too loudly, the healer would appear with a smoky twig and a look of profound judgment. And they knew things. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that certain leaves ease stomach pain, that some berries are poison, that wounds fester when ignored. They might not have known why, but they'd seen what happened when people did or didn't act. They also had tools of sorts, a pouch full of dried herbs, a shell for mixing, sharp stones, feathers, bits of bone. One even carried a badger paw on a string, symbolic or practical, unclear. But it made an excellent back scratcher. Some healers focused on touch pressing, massaging, aligning limbs. Others preferred smoke and chants. Some mixed drinks from fermented fruit herbs and questionable stream water. If it knocked you out, it was medicine. If it didn't, they just called it cleansing. You watch as she begins mixing something with crushed bark and honey. She's humming again, an old tune older than the hills, possibly older than socks. It's comforting in a strange, itchy way, even when the mixture goes up your nose. Because yes, sometimes healing involved a little humiliation, snorting herbs, wearing mud masks, sitting perfectly still while a squirrel skull is balanced on your chest. You're not entirely sure what's working and what's for show, but you don't complain. That got you extra herbs last time. The itchy ones. Community belief backed the healer. If she said you needed to eat charred lizard tail to cleanse your humors well, you did. And if it worked miraculously or coincidentally, it became tradition. Sometimes even ceremony. A rite passed down like a family recipe with only a small risk of internal bleeding. Still, there was care in it. Even in the oddest rituals, the least appetizing brews, the most questionable applications of squirrel oil, there was effort. Someone stayed up with you. Someone watched your breathing, added wood to the fire, whispered that the spirits were listening. Whether or not the spirits actually RSVP'd was secondary, and healers were often women, though not always. Some were elderly men with wild eyes and fewer teeth. Others were younger, chosen for their memory, their dreams, or the way they could identify 30 plants by scent alone. Gender was flexible when it came to survival. If you knew how to stop bleeding, no one cared whether you also happened to braid your hair with snail shells. Healers didn't just deal with sickness, they dealt with the unknown. The strange rash, the dream that wouldn't stop, the baby who wouldn't cry. They stood at the edge of understanding, peering into the darkness, occasionally yelling helpful things like, "Rub it with ash and sing louder." And in doing so, they gave the tribe something priceless, the illusion of control. Illness was terrifying in the Stone Age. A cough could mean anything. A seizure looked like possession. A swollen gland might be punishment from spirits or just a really bad root. The healer's presence, calm, odd confident, helped everyone believe that maybe this wasn't the end. You sip something hot from a carved cup. It tastes like bark tea and burnt regret. But it's warm, and that's something. You lean back. Your elbow still aches, your leg still twitches, and now your tongue is a little numb. The healer nods. Success. Night returns. You're tucked in with a fur blanket and a pebble under your head. Outside, wolves howl distantly, as if complaining about the weather. Inside, you exhale. Safe sort of. Sick still, but watched over. And that's enough. You wake in the night with a start. Not because of wolves. Not because the healer's nearby with another questionable potion. No, it's your head. Not the dreamy, fuzzy kind of ache, but something sharp and heavy pressing behind your eyes like a mammoth's been using your skull as a footstool. You sit up. Bad idea. The world tilts. It's the headache again. Or maybe something worse. Your camp doesn't have a name for migraine. They just call it the spirit pressing or sky sickness. And they have methods. You already know this will involve rocks, possibly near your face. The healer is up, of course. She always is. It's unclear if she sleeps or just wanders the edge of the forest, talking to mushrooms. She sees you squints knowingly and begins rummaging in her pouch. You try to lie down and pretend you're fine. Doesn't work. She's already humming. Trepanation. Yes, let's talk about that. Archaeologists have uncovered Stone Age skulls with small, deliberate holes bored into them. Not smashed, not cracked, but carefully scraped, like someone was trying to open a coconut without damaging the meat. And many of these skulls show signs of healing. The people survived, which means someone performed brain surgery using flint tools and didn't kill the patient, at least not immediately. Historians still argue whether this was medicine or ritual or both. Some believe it was done to relieve pressure from head trauma infections or severe headaches. Others think it was more spiritual, releasing demons letting spirits escape, or even allowing a new one in. Bit of a gamble, really. You feel something cold touch your forehead, a flat stone. The healer presses gently, then begins a slow circle with her thumb. Thankfully, tonight isn't a drilling night. You're not that unlucky. But still, the implication is there. If this gets worse, she knows how to make a hole in your head. Comforting. There were no scalpels, no sterilization, no consent forms. Just sharpened stone, a steady hand, and maybe a bone needle for decoration. The operation was likely done with the patient awake, possibly drugged with fermented fruit or numbed with cold. Possibly just held down by two cousins and a goat. Still, some survived. We know this from healed bone edges around the holes. Some skulls even show multiple trepanations repeat customers. Either it worked or someone was very determined to let the spirits out in stages. You press your fingers to your temple and breathe. The healer hums louder now, drawing circles in the dirt. Around you, the fire crackles. Someone snores. A dog-shaped lump shifts nearby. The night is quiet, except for your pulse thudding with rhythmic irritation. There's a long-standing theory that these procedures weren't just medical, they were prestige. If you had a hole in your head and lived, it meant something. Maybe you were wise, touched by spirits, or just stubborn. Either way, it added to your story. And there's your toothache too. Don't think you're safe just because your skull's intact. Dental issues were rampant. No toothbrushes, no floss, just a steady diet of grit charred meat and the occasional pebble hidden in soup. Cavities formed, gums swelled, teeth broke. What did they do? Well, they poked them, scraped them, sometimes pulled them with tweezers carved from bone, or twisted out using twine and nerve. There's even evidence of beeswax fillings in some early Neolithic teeth. Someone thought sticky tree goo might help. And honestly, that's the sort of problem solving we admire. You remember a man named Poor Huge Shoulders, Very Few Teeth. He once chewed a stick for 3 days straight because he said it helped his molar pain. Then the tooth fell out. Success, possibly. Or just gravity doing its thing. Either way, Paul was pleased. Back in your hut, the healer places a mix of ground herbs and ash under your tongue. It tastes like despair, but the pressure behind your eyes eases just slightly. She draws a symbol in the air, 3 wavy lines, possibly a river, or possibly just her being dramatic, and you relax. There's comfort in the ritual, even if you doubt the ingredients. She touches your forehead with a feather, then places a small stone by your side for protection, or as a paperweight. Hard to say. The open debate about Stone Age health practices continues. Were these people medical geniuses with limited tools, or enthusiastic amateurs with a flair for the theatrical? The answer, as always, lies somewhere in between. You had to try things. You had to remember what worked. You had to trust the healer because there was no one else. Your headache fades, not gone but dulled. You lie back down, pulling your furs close. The healer mutters one last chant and throws a pinch of something into the fire. Sparks rise. Your eyes close. No holes in your head tonight. Small victories. Morning finds you with a slight headache hangover and a lingering taste of ash and something suspiciously minty clinging to your tongue. You sit up slowly, joints creaking like ancient tree bark, and look around for the healer, who is unsurprisingly already crouched in a patch of dew-soaked weeds, talking to her plants again. She waves a leaf at you, possibly a greeting, possibly a warning. Today it's about plants, herbs, roots, seeds, stems, everything that looks remotely edible and may or may not double as medicine. You wander over, still wrapped in a fur that smells like damp wolf, and squat beside her. She's sorting bundles, one for sleep, one for pain, one labeled in a system that seems to consist entirely of grunts and eyebrow twitches. You've learned to respect the green things, because even if you can't read, and you definitely can't Google, is this poisonous? You know, this some leaves help, some kill, some just make you vomit until you're too tired to care. And that's knowledge won through centuries of stomach-based experimentation. Historians still argue whether Stone Age people developed a formal system of medicinal botany or simply passed down practical experience. Likely both. You don't need Latin classifications to remember that Aunt Wheeler's blue root tea cured your cough but made you dream about talking owls for a week. Today the healer hands you something pale and stringy. Willow bark. Chew it, she says. You do. Its bitter makes your teeth feel like they're attending a funeral, but it helps your headache. Modern scientists say willow bark contains salicin, essentially prehistoric aspirin. Your ancestors didn't know the chemistry, but they knew the result. Then there's yarrow. Chewed to stop bleeding, stuffed into wounds, or brewed into a tea that tastes like regret. Or nettle, used for inflammation once you've figured out how not to get stung during the harvesting process. That part took a few generations to sort out. And don't forget garlic. Found in ancient sites, its smell alone probably scared off both bacteria and unwanted suitors. It was crushed, boiled, eaten raw, even stuffed up the nose. Not all of these were effective. Most were messy. The healer opens her pouch and reveals a small pungent bundle dried mushrooms. You instinctively lean back. Not all mushrooms are friends. Some send you on spirit quests. Some send you to your ancestors a little early. It depends on dosage season and whether the squirrel you copied looked ill or just sleepy. There's a running joke in camp: if it tastes good, it's probably not medicine. If it smells like a dying frog and makes your mouth tingle, that's the good stuff. And to be fair, the nastiest brews often had the most impact. Fever-reducing teas, anti-inflammatory barks, and digestive root tonics all had something in common: a truly unfortunate aftertaste. You remember once being given a bulb that made your ears ring. You also stopped coughing. The healer nodded, sagely scribbled a symbol into the dirt, and handed it to someone else. That's research. Of course, some medicines were more wishful than effective. Crushed ants, charred bird bones, powdered snail shells. Someone once made you drink a tea that turned your tongue purple. Not for any particular illness, just to rebalance your shadow. You're still not sure if that was medical or performance art. Still, a pattern emerges. People watched each other, observed outcomes, and remembered. They noticed that drinking a certain root after eating spoiled meat made you less likely to die in the night. They noted that some leaves stopped itching while others caused it. Over time, knowledge solidified, not in books, but in rituals, habits, and whispered instructions. And plants weren't only used internally. Poultices were made from bark pulp, salves from animal fat and herbs, leaves layered over wounds, stems tied around throbbing joints. The forest became a pharmacy, and the healer a pharmacist, with a bone necklace and an extremely vague pricing policy. Of course, there were accidents. You recall one lad who misidentified a berry, proudly brewed it into a cure, and promptly fainted halfway through breakfast. He survived, mostly because someone fed him charcoal and called it an earth cleansing. The story became legend. The berry got a nickname Oopsberry. Beyond the physical plants also held spiritual meaning. Some were burned to cleanse bad air. Others were offered to spirits. Certain seeds were planted near sick mats as symbolic gestures growth, as a metaphor for healing. Or maybe just wishful thinking. And then there were the plant trials, the brave or unlucky few who volunteered or were volunteered to try something new. They chewed, sipped, inhaled, and endured. If they lived, the herb went into rotation. If they didn't, well noted. As you sit by the healer, chewing something that tastes like mint and despair, you reflect on the quiet genius of it all. No microscopes, no double-blind studies, just attention memory and a willingness to try. The forest was full of options. The healer was full of opinions. And between the two, medicine happened. You burp. Something herbal. Possibly alarming. The healer pats your back and hands you a small seed. For dreams, she says. You pop it in your mouth and lean back, letting the rain begin again, feeling the slow, leafy hum of healing work its way through your bones. The rain finally stops, leaving everything slick and steaming. Mist curls around the edges of the camp, like it's trying to sneak a look at what you're up to. You're feeling mostly upright, if a bit herb-scented. But now, someone else is coughing, a raspy, rattling sound coming from the sleeping mat next to yours. It's Morn, the old storyteller, and she's muttering about being followed by wind spirits. Lovely. Welcome to the intersection of sickness and superstition. In the Stone Age, physical and spiritual health weren't separate. A sore throat might be caused by smoke or maybe by a ghost living in your chest. Depends on who you ask. You could have a fever from sleeping too close to a draft, or because a rival cursed you by pointing at your shadow during the equinox. Both explanations get equal weight. Your healer nods knowingly and starts rummaging again. Not for herbs this time, but for her special kit feathers, painted stones, a small bird skull on a string, and something that looks like a dried lizard tail. This isn't medicine. This is something else. Historians still argue whether these rituals were medical in disguise or purely spiritual affairs. But from where you're sitting, they're both. If you think your illness is caused by an angry ancestor, and someone waves feathers over you and sings the anger away, and you feel better afterward, isn't that healing? The ceremony begins. Morn is propped up, coughing into a cloth that used to be part of someone's tunic. The healer begins to circle her, chanting low, scattering ash, tapping her staff rhythmically against the ground. The rest of the camp watches, not out of boredom, but reverence. This is serious, or at least important. You're handed a small bowl of water to catch the sickness. You don't question it. That's the rule. Illness travels like smoke, like shadows, like whispers between trees. If you look directly at it, it might leap. If you treat it gently, respectfully, it might drift away. Stone Age spirituality wasn't about belief the way we think of it. Now, it was about survival. If the healer said a spirit caused your limp, it meant you needed rest and a charm. If someone had convulsions, they weren't sick, they were visited. Treatment might include song smudging with herbs or laying stones along the spine in carefully remembered patterns. You remember once having a rash that wouldn't go away. The healer blamed it on moon envy and made you sleep with a polished stone under your tongue. Did it help? Who knows? But you stopped scratching, possibly because you were too focused on not choking on the stone. Some illnesses were considered contagious spiritually or otherwise. People would avoid eye contact, whisper behind their hands, or leave food just outside the sleeping area. But they didn't abandon the sick. No, they just became cautious. Rituals helped manage fear. Morn's ceremony continues. The healer rubs charcoal on her chest, then places a carved bone on her forehead. She recites a tale of wind spirits, of breath stolen from the lungs of hunters who whistled after dark. It's oddly comforting. The myth gives meaning to suffering, a narrative, and humans love narratives. You glance around. Others are nodding slowly, not in boredom, but in agreement. Everyone's seen someone disappear after a long sickness. Everyone's heard the stories of ghosts in the hills. Whether or not the spirits are real, the fear is. And so is the need to feel like anyone has a plan. Eventually, Morn drinks a brew of herbs and warm water. She lies down. The healer draws a spiral in ash on her mat. The crowd disperses. Nothing flashy, no sudden cures, just care belief and a quiet return to the fire. Later, you find your own charm tucked into your furs, a bit of bone carved with 3 dots. A reminder, perhaps, or insurance. You leave it there. Supernatural healing wasn't a side project in the Stone Age. It was part of everything. Spirits caused disease. Spirits cured it. The line between medical and mystical was smudged like charcoal on a wet day, and perhaps in a way that helped. It gave people something to do, something to believe, something to pass down. You drift off that night to the sound of the healer, whispering into the darkness, asking the wind to go easy on Morn, promising feathers and smoke in return, just in case it's cold again. Not the romantic kind of cold that makes you want to wrap up and drink something spicy. No, this is the kind that seeps into your joints, stiffens your neck, and turns your breath into little clouds of complaint. You sniff. Once, twice. Then comes the cough. Deep, unwelcome, and oddly theatrical. Congratulations. You've got a prehistoric cold. You shuffle out from under your fur's nose, already running like a small stream. There's no tissue box in 7000 BC. No vitamin C tablets. Just the increasingly familiar routine of trying not to die of something minor. And today, your enemy is invisible, airborne, and everywhere. You're not alone. Coughs echo from the next hut. Someone is sneezing into a woven basket. Another is curled near the fire with a pile of mint leaves and a haunted look. The camp has caught it, whatever it is. Maybe a rhinovirus. Maybe the wrath of the river god. Hard to say. Historians still argue whether Stone Age people understood the concept of contagion. They likely didn't know about viruses, but they saw patterns. One person gets sick, then another, then another. They noticed, and they adjusted. Sick people were gently encouraged to sit over there by that tree with their own fire and their own cup of boiled pine water. You trudge towards the healer's hut, clutching your side like a dramatic actor in a very slow play. She greets you with a knowing nod and an already brewing pot of not quite tea. It smells like boiled socks and fennel. It'll help, she says. You sip, you regret it. You sip again. The treatment for a cold in the Stone Age was simple warmth rest and a rotating schedule of extremely optimistic herbs. Mint for congestion, willow bark for fever, honey, if you're lucky, to soothe the throat. If you're really lucky, someone rubs bear grease on your chest. Not helpful, but excellent for conversation. And there's garlic again. Crushed and mixed with fat, rubbed under the arms, or heaven, help you eat in raw. If it doesn't cure the cold, it at least guarantees personal space. Your breath now qualifies as a weapon. The healer examines your eyes, listens to your chest, and prods your belly. She declares your spirit sluggish and recommends sitting near steam while holding a rock. You do it, because at this point, you'll try anything short of licking a frog. Of course, you're also expected to help yourself. You're given a mix of dried herbs to chew, a fur to wrap around your shoulders, and a firm reminder not to sleep in damp spots. Dampness, they believe, invites illness. And to be fair, so does snoring with your head in a puddle. There's no cure, just comfort, which is oddly modern, really. The healer can't banish your cough, but she can offer soup made from root vegetables, a chest rub of animal fat and sage, and the soothing presence of someone who knows a dozen different ways to say this, too shall pass, without using those exact words. And even with the lack of antibiotics or antihistamines, people usually recovered. Stone Age colds were annoying but survivable. It was the fevers and infections that followed which caused concern. The healer watches you closely, not just for worsening symptoms, but for signs of a deeper affliction. You remember a child, once flushed and listless for days. The healer fed her honey mixed with bark tea, sang to her nightly, and placed heated stones near her feet. She survived, barely, but the story of her rebirth became legend. Now every time someone sneezes, they nod solemnly and say, like little Ina. You're not sure Ina enjoys the fame. That night, you sleep propped up, wrapped in extra hides, breathing in the faint scent of dried mint and boiled moss. Someone snores in the next hut. Someone coughs. The healer drifts through the camp, checking pulses, tucking furs. It's not high-tech, but it's care. And you start to feel better. Not dramatically, not with trumpets and healed limbs, just a little clearer, a little warmer. You're still coughing, but less. And really that's the goal here, not a miracle. Just another day, another sunrise, another morning of being slightly less miserable than the night before. You blow your nose into a piece of woven grass mat and mutter thanks to whatever leafy concoction got you through this one. By mid-morning, the clouds have broken and the camp stirs with renewed purpose, or at least a collective grunt of mild inconvenience. You stretch stiffly, sniffling a little less than yesterday, and wander towards the outer edge of the clearing. Your leg twinges your elbow, itches, but on balance, you're alive and upright, which is a lot actually for this era. You pause near the main shelter, the largest, most ambitious hut in the camp. It's made of timber thatch and layers of woven reeds. It leans slightly to one side, and the roof sags like it's having a personal crisis, but it stays up. Mostly. Shelter in the Stone Age isn't glamorous, but it is essential. And here's the irony. You have shelter now. You've evolved past caves and into something resembling a village. You've built walls to keep out wind roofs, to shed rain, and shared fires to warm the cold. But you're still getting sick. Historians still argue whether permanent settlement improved or worsened human health. On one hand, shelter protected you from wild animals' exposure and the sheer chaos of nomadic life. On the other hand, being packed together in small, smoky spaces, perfect conditions for sharing every cough, sneeze, and mysterious fungal outbreak. You step inside. It's warm, not in a cozy hot chocolate and wool socks way, but in a trapped smoke damp floor. Someone's been sweating near the fire sort of way. You breathe shallowly and keep your distance from Morn, who's still wrapped in a fur and hacking occasionally into a piece of bark. She waves. You wave back politely, not inhaling. Early huts were often built low to retain heat, with central fires and few ventilation options. Add in damp animal skins, soggy mats, and a general shortage of dry socks, and you've got a brilliant incubator for everything from colds to chest infections. It's basically the prehistoric version of a poorly ventilated office. Still, people made it work. Furs were aired out, fires were maintained with care, mats were replaced with dried reeds, and if someone got seriously ill, they might be moved to a smaller shelter, sometimes even a lean-to, outside the main hut, where the air was fresher and the likelihood of infecting everyone else slightly lower. You glance at your own bedding, slightly musty, possibly damp. You hang it up on a wooden pole outside, hoping for sun, or wind, or divine intervention. The healer wanders by, eyes narrowed, sniffing the air like a very judgmental fox. She nods at your attempt at sanitation and tosses a handful of dried herbs into the communal fire. It flares up, sending a plume of sharp, almost pleasant smoke into the air. The scent is part ritual, part deodorizer, part insect repellent, mostly to confuse whatever was living in the floor mats. In some camps, people smeared ash on the ground to absorb moisture and discourage bugs. Others added aromatic plants to the thatch, and many practiced an early form of airing out, which involved standing in the wind and shouting at clouds. Okay, the shouting might have been unrelated, but it probably helped morale. You step back inside and notice how quickly the warmth returns heat from the fire, heat from bodies, and the gentle simmer of that one pot that's always full of mysterious root soup. The air is heavy, but it's home. And in the Stone Age, home meant everything: safety, community, and somewhere dryish to sleep. Shelter gave you routine, and routine gave you the chance to rest when ill, to heal without wandering to stay warm through long nights of coughing. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even particularly clean, but it worked just well enough. And still the flu swept through. Sore throats came and went. Fevers rose, lingered, sometimes broke and sometimes didn't. You learned to spot danger signs: too quiet, too pale, breathing too fast or too slow. The healer would hum a little more seriously. That's when people sat up straighter or left offerings. You remember once watching a sick child be moved closer to the fire. Stones heated and wrapped in bark were placed around her feet. She was fanned gently with pine boughs, and ash was sprinkled in a circle around her mat. It wasn't just medicine. It was care, effort, attention. And sometimes that made the difference. You lean back now near the fire, your nose clearing slightly, your limbs less heavy. The hut creaks softly in the wind. Someone's grinding roots in the corner. Someone else snores dramatically, having fallen asleep mid-sentence. And outside the wind shifts, not exactly clean, but fresher, drying the mats, scattering the smoke, whispering promises of one more day of not dying. You smile, slightly. You're whittling a stick, or pretending to, as a way of looking busy while avoiding chores. The camp's quieter today, less coughing, fewer mysterious rashes. It almost feels peaceful until a scream slices through the air like a flint blade through rawhide. You drop the stick. Everyone rushes towards the source of the noise. It's Tor, the youngest hunter. He's hunched over, clutching his hand, blood dripping onto the dirt. He was trying to split flint, and judging by the sheer volume of his swearing, he missed. Now let's talk about stone tools. Incredible things. Sharp, precise, engineered through trial error and the occasional finger sacrifice. You admire them when they slice roots like butter. You respect them when they carve bone into needles. But when they nick a vein, suddenly they're less glamorous. Tor is rushed to the healer, who eyes the gash with a sigh. She's seen worse. Flint wounds were part of life in the Stone Age. You use sharp rocks to make everything cut meat, scrape hides, perform light surgery, and sooner or later, they bite back. First comes pressure. Someone grabs clean moss, well clean, being a generous term, and presses it to the wound. Blood wells up. Everyone makes sympathetic noises while very intentionally not vomiting, you included. Historians still argue whether Stone Age people understood concepts like infection or simply worked by instinct and observation. But they clearly took steps to clean wounds, washing with water, applying plant matter with antiseptic properties, and sealing with honey fat or clay. We even have evidence of wound stitching using animal sinew, which sounds awful until you consider the alternative flapping skin and a career change. The healer fetches her tools, a bone needle sinew thread, and a little pot of thick paste that smells like crushed garlic and despair. She cleans the wound with a handful of boiled herbs, blows on it theatrically, then begins sewing. Tor winces, but doesn't pass out. Everyone claps, lightly. Stone tools also meant more ambitious procedures. Abscess slice and drain, embedded thorn, tweeze it out with bone pincers. Tooth rotting in your skull, tie it to a string, attach the other end to something fast-moving. Goat child wind spirit, and hope for the best. You once saw someone attempt to cauterize a wound. Red-hot rock pressed to flesh. The scream was unforgettable. So was the smell. But it worked, sort of. Infection didn't set in, and he got a new nickname, Smokefoot. Tor's wound is now bandaged with moss bark and twine. The healer nods solemnly, as if the forest itself approved. He's told not to use his hand for a few days, which he mishears, as don't do any chores, and immediately begins an award-worthy limp for good measure. Back in your corner, you eye your own tools, flint knife bone, all stone hammer, each one essential, each one dangerous. And yet, you'd never give them up. They're your toothbrush, your fork, your scissors, and if you're particularly unlucky, your surgeon's blade. People in the Stone Age weren't reckless. They respected tools. Children were taught to carve slowly cut away from the body and always check for stray fingers. Accidents happened, but care was taken because injuries didn't just hurt. They slowed you down. They risked infection. They made you expendable. Still, the community rallied. When someone got hurt, others stepped up. Meals were shared. Mats were fluffed. Jokes were told. You once had a splinter so deep you limped for days, and 3 separate cousins offered to amputate just to be safe. You declined. You look at Tor now, propped up with one hand in a sling made from someone's old belt. He's grinning like a war hero. His injury will be a story, a scar, a new line in the camp's collective memory. Remember when Thor tried to chip flint before breakfast? Someone will say, and everyone will nod. Because pain, oddly, is communal. Night comes. You sit near the fire, polishing your own flint tool with cautious admiration. It's sharp enough to slice meat, sharp enough to save a life, sharp enough to end one too. But in the right hands, your hands steady and slightly trembling, it's just another part of being human. The rain's taken a holiday for once, and the sun makes a rare appearance, slanting through the trees like it's lost and not entirely sure it wants to be here. You take a walk beyond the camp legs, still stiff, elbow still weirdly itchy, but spirits high. You wander into the caves. Not the caves, just some caves. There are always caves. Inside, the air is cool and still. Your eyes adjust slowly. The walls come into view, flickers of ochre and charcoal dancing across the surface in animal shapes, handprints, abstract spirals. Bison, deer, maybe a bear, maybe just someone with poor artistic instincts. Stone Age cave art has long intrigued modern scholars. It's art, obviously, but it may also have been information, a kind of storytelling or ritual, or even some suggest medicine. Yes, really. Some researchers believe these images might have served as early diagnostics or health logs. Others think they were just excellent excuses to avoid fetching water. You pause at a painting, a figure with dots along its side, limbs bent oddly, head exaggerated. It's not a stick person, it's a statement. Is it a representation of illness, injury, a warning, or just the ancient version of look what happened to Brian, poor lad? Historians still argue whether these drawings had direct medical meaning or were part of spiritual healing rites. Some think the caves were sacred spaces where the sick came to be treated or at least considered. The paintings might not depict physical sickness as we understand it, but rather the experience of suffering transformation or spiritual imbalance. You remember someone in the camp who painted lines on their face whenever they were unwell, not to announce sickness, more like a signal, a ritual, a way to say, I'm in it right now. Maybe these cave paintings served the same function, not diagnosis, but reflection. You trace your fingers near the wall, careful not to touch. The pigments are old iron oxide manganese crushed plants, possibly blood, mixed with animal fat saliva or water, a sticky intentional blend. Someone stood here thousands of years ago preparing their palette, with one eye on the spirits and one on their patient. And they didn't paint alone. This was likely a community activity, a shared expression. The painter, the healer, the watcher, each with a role. You can almost hear the whispers. More red on the leg wound, or that's not what a mammoth looks like. Try again. There are also carvings, scratched symbols. Some look like tally marks. Could be counting days of illness, could be recording recoveries, could just be boredom. In the absence of a journal, stone makes a fine substitute. You once knew a woman in the camp who etched lines into her spear every time she felt a fever coming on. Not out of superstition, just pattern recognition. And when she died, the healer kept the spear, said it held her story. Maybe these cave marks do too. Further in, you find a recess, sheltered, quiet, dim. Bits of burned wood suggest fire once lived here. It feels ceremonial, a place for something more than sleep. Perhaps someone was laid here, wrapped in furs, marked with ochre, whispered to, until the fever passed or took them. You sit for a while, breathing slow. The cave is silent except for the occasional drip of water and the rustle of your thoughts. You feel the weight of time here, not heavy, just present, like a blanket you didn't ask for, but kind of need. And you think of the healer again, her chants, her stones, her careful observation of rash patterns and breathing rhythms. She's not a scientist, but she's a student of the human body in her own way. And perhaps when she paints, she's adding to this strange ancient library, each symbol a case file, each bison a memory, each handprint a witness. You head back toward the light, stepping over stones smoothed by centuries of feet. Outside, the sun is still deciding whether to commit. The camp is visible through the trees, smoke curling upward, someone laughing, someone coughing. The rhythms of a people who, against all odds, are still here. You smile. The cave hasn't healed you, but it's made you feel seen. And maybe that's something. Evening returns in that usual prehistoric fashion. No clocks, no countdowns, just a subtle dimming of the sky and an increase in yawning. You're sitting by the fire now, your limbs aching, less than they did a week ago. Your cough mostly a memory, and your general enthusiasm for mushroom tea hovering at a polite no thank you. Tonight it's not you who's ailing, it's Tama. She's slipped on a wet stone, twisted her ankle, and is now being carried, not without complaint, back into camp. You and two others hoist her with practiced awkwardness, trying to avoid dropping her in the mud. Again, this is what care looks like in the Stone Age. Not heroics, not hospitals, just three people grunting and shifting under the weight of someone else's bad luck. Historians still argue whether prehistoric communities regularly provided long-term care for the sick and injured, or whether only certain individuals, elders, mothers, spiritual leaders, were deemed worth the effort. But evidence suggests that people didn't just abandon their wounded. They adapted, slowed down, shared burdens. You lower Tama onto a thick mat near the fire. Someone brings her water. Another pulls off her moccasin and inspects the swelling. The healer arrives already unimpressed and begins muttering about reckless running and slippery spirits. She starts mixing something in a shell bowl. Roots, probably. Maybe crushed beetle. Maybe optimism, and you sit nearby. Not because you're particularly helpful, but because being there matters. Presence, after all, is the oldest medicine. You remember when you were the one groaning and bundled in furs. Someone sat with you then, told stories, passed you lukewarm bark tea, laughed at your complaints. It's a cycle. Illness, healing, return, repeat. Even children help. They bring sticks for the fire. They fetch water. One of them gives Tama a pebble for luck, which she pretends to treasure, even though it's slightly damp and smells of frog. Kindness, like illness, is contagious. There's no formal nursing role here. No clean uniforms, no hourly rounds. Just people stepping in, people noticing. Someone places a hand on Tama's forehead. Another adjusts her blanket. Someone, probably that same kid, offers her half a roasted root. Group care wasn't always noble. Sometimes it was selfish. If Tama recovers, she can gather berries, tend the fire, or stop that one lad from singing off key during rituals. But even pragmatic care is care. It's the effort that counts, and effort is everywhere. The healer wraps Tama's ankle in soft bark strips and moss. She instructs her to rest. Everyone nods, then immediately discusses how to divide her usual chores. The rhythm adjusts. You remember stories of other camps. A man who lost his arm to a boar and still helped hunt by carrying spears in his teeth. A woman who went blind and became the keeper of songs. People made space because life was already hard. Making it harder for others was frowned upon, quietly but firmly. That's not to say it was utopia. Sometimes people got left behind. Sometimes illness became too much. But more often than not, humans proved themselves deeply unwilling to give up on one another. If you could still laugh, still listen, still offer advice about which mushrooms not to eat, well, you were useful. There's a kind of magic in that. Not the smoky, feather-waving kind. The real kind. The everyday, unremarkable sort of magic that keeps people alive simply by refusing to forget them. Tama is asleep now, leg propped up on a folded mat. Someone's adding herbs to the fire, not for healing, just for smell. The camp settles. The stars emerge quiet and indifferent as always. You stretch a little sore from carrying her. But you don't mind. You'll do it again tomorrow if needed. Someone did it for you. And one day, someone will do it for them. A lineage not of blood, but of lifting. You smile in the dark. Group care isn't always grand. Sometimes it's just being willing to stay up a little later, to hold someone's hand through a fever, to carry them when they fall, or in this case, to avoid rolling your eyes when they dramatically insist their ankle is clearly cursed. By mid-morning, the camp is quiet. Not eerily so, just that kind of hush that settles when everyone's either asleep, out gathering, or carefully pretending to be useful while secretly napping under a tree. You, of course, are on watch duty, which in this case means staring vaguely into the middle distance while your thoughts wander. And today, they wander to bones, specifically the bones of the ones who didn't make it. Tama is still resting ankle-wrapped spirits high. But not everyone recovers. In the Stone Age, death came easily sometimes, with warning, sometimes not. And when it did, people responded, not just with grief, but with ritual, with care, with bone. You remember the last burial. A man older than most, wrapped in animal hides, carefully laid in a shallow grave near the edge of the trees. His body had been cleaned, daubed with ochre, and placed in a specific position, fetal, like a return to beginnings. Tools were placed beside him, a few beads, one of his worn-out flint blades, a small bundle of herbs. Historians still argue whether these grave goods were for the afterlife symbolic gestures, or simply meaningful offerings. Probably all three. Death wasn't an ending. It was a passage. And the community sent you off with everything they thought you might need except directions, which, to be fair, even modern people struggle with. And bones. Well, they tell stories. Archaeologists find them and read the subtle messages, healed fractures, worn joints, teeth, ground down from years of gritty meals. Some skeletons show signs of long-term disability, a fused knee, a spine bent from disease. But these weren't dumped or hidden. They were buried with care, which suggests something quietly revolutionary. These people were looked after. You once saw the healer sit beside an elder who could barely walk. She fed him, cleaned his mat, sang him something that sounded suspiciously like the story of a very unlucky fish. He laughed, not because the pain was gone, but because someone still saw him. Burial sites reveal more than just how people died. They hint at how people lived with illness. A woman with arthritis, buried with finely worked tools, a man with an amputated foot who clearly lived for years afterward. These weren't abandoned, they were remembered. Sometimes people were buried with symbols of their affliction. A carved stone shaped like a twisted leg, a piece of bark etched with patterns that resembled coughing breath. Was it identification, a kind of Stone Age medical chart, or just a way of saying this was part of them? And there's the question of the healer's burials, sometimes more elaborate, sometimes hidden, often with bundles of herbs, carved charms, polished stones. The camp needed them in life and honored them in death, though you suspect some also hoped it would stop them from coming back and haunting the soup. There's a hill not far from camp where the older graves are. You visit sometimes, sit among the stones, listen to the wind, and pretend it says something helpful. Someone once told you that sickness fades from the body, but not from memory. It becomes a shape in the stories, a warning, a lesson, a quiet mark of resilience. You remember a child, small, always sneezing, but stubbornly cheerful. She died one winter, wrapped in fox fur, buried with her favorite pebble, and a carved figure of a deer. Her parents still place leaves on the grave. You once saw the healer leave a bundle of dried flowers. No ceremony, just remembrance. And sometimes you find bones, not human, not always, but there's a pause when you do, a stillness. You call the healer. She comes, touches the bone, looks at the soil. Sometimes she nods, sometimes she tells a story. Once she gave you a piece to keep. So you remember she said, you still have it. It's shaped like a question. Tonight the camp gathers, not for mourning, just for fire. But there's always a moment when someone stares into the flames a little too long. When the stories shift from hunting to remembering. When someone mentions a name not spoken in moons. And in those moments, you understand the dead are still part of the tribe. Their illnesses, their injuries, their survival, or lack of it, echo in the way you treat each other, in the way you bandage a wound, share a mat, offer a sip of something awful but warm, because memory, like medicine, is passed hand to hand. You wake up with a sneeze so powerful it startles a nearby bird into reconsidering its morning plans. Brilliant. Another cold. Or perhaps the same one back for an encore performance. It's hard to tell these days. They all blur into a cycle of sniffling, grumbling, and clutching warm things. But this time, it hits differently. Not just you. Half the camp's sniffling once lost their voice. Someone else is coughing with the theatrical flair of a storyteller auditioning for the lead role in the world's loudest death. And all of it during migration season. Yes, migration. The glorious time when everyone picks up their entire lives, wraps their belongings in animal hides, and walks for days on aching feet toward marginally warmer places. It's tradition. It's survival. It's utterly inconvenient when you have the Stone Age equivalent of the flu. And yet here you are, packing up mats, rolling up furs, and trying not to cough on the dried meat stash. The healer frowns and starts doling out spirit protection bundles, little pouches of herbs tied with gut string. They smell like burnt rosemary and regret. You tuck yours into your belt, part talisman, part placebo, mostly tradition. Historians still argue whether these movements were strictly seasonal or partly reactive, chasing better food sources, avoiding illness outbreaks, or just following the weather like very determined ducks. But what's certain is this migrating while sick was one of the more unpleasant features of prehistoric life, and travel didn't help. Cold air, wet feet, dodgy water sources. You stumble along, nose running joints, aching, and the overwhelming sense that your ancestors invented camping as a punishment. Still, the community moves together. No one is left behind. You slow down for the older ones, the limping ones, the ones carrying sneezing toddlers who insist on licking every stone. If someone collapses, you make camp early. If someone's too weak to walk, you carry them. Sort of. You drag them on a sled made of questionable engineering and pure grit. Your own symptoms shift daily. Headache, sore throat, that ticklish cough that always strikes when you're trying to sleep. The healer checks your eyes, listens to your chest, and hands you a heated stone to hold. It's not clear if it's medical or just something to keep you from complaining. And yet you keep going, one foot after another, through mud, across rivers, over hills that exist solely to spite you. You pause often to rest, to tend wounds, to drink dubious tea that may or may not contain fermented badger droppings. You try not to ask. You recall once hearing of a tribe that stayed put during a sickness outbreak, made a sacred circle of stones, waited out. The fever burned their sleeping mats afterward. You wonder now if that wasn't a bad idea. But your group moves on, because they have to. The food here's nearly gone. The game trails are drying up, the rivers shrinking. And so you pack your sniffles and keep moving. Along the way, the healer collects herbs, fungi lichen. She mutters about balance, watches the color of your phlegm, which is a new level of intimacy, and occasionally smacks someone with a reed for trying to hide a fever. She's strict but fair. You sleep under the stars most nights, bundled with others for warmth, coughing in chorus. Someone tells stories to pass the time tales of how the first humans learned to sing to keep away illness, or how the wind once carried healing if you asked politely. One night, a child develops a fever. The healer sits with them all evening, chanting softly, placing damp cloths on their forehead, whispering that the moon is watching. Everyone else goes quiet. Not out of fear exactly, just understanding. Sickness travels with you no matter where you go. The child recovers. Slowly. Everyone breathes easier. You move on. Eventually, you reach the winter camp. A familiar clearing with wind-sheltered hollows and half-built huts waiting like old friends. You collapse near the main fire, half dead, fully exhausted, and mildly surprised to have made it. The healer passes around bowls of something warm and vaguely mushroom-shaped. She declares the migration a success. Everyone coughs in agreement. You settle into the new rhythm, rebuilding, resting, healing, sniffling yes, but less dramatically. The illness fades, or at least becomes background noise, like the wind, like the memories of all the other winters you've survived. Migration with the cold is no one's idea of fun, but it's a reminder you're not alone. You're part of a unit, a group that moves together, coughs together, survives together. And if you have to sneeze, please, for everyone's sake, aim away from the firewood. The wind is gentler now, not warm exactly. This is still the Stone Age after all, but less insistent, like it's finally remembered how to whisper. The winter camp has settled into its usual rhythm, repairing huts, boiling dubious roots, and trying not to fall on the ice-patched slope behind the latrine area. You're mostly better. The cough has faded. Your ankle doesn't sing every time you bend down. The healer says your fire is balanced again, which you assume means she won't hit you with a sage bundle today. Things are quiet, but something lingers, a sort of echo, the aches that never quite go, the stiffness in the morning, that odd clicking sound your knee makes when the temperature drops. You're not dying, but you're not entirely thriving either. Chronic pain in the Stone Age wasn't a diagnosis, it was a fact of life. There were no words for fibromyalgia or rheumatism. There was just, my back does that when it rains, or you'll get used to it. And yet, you carried on. Historians still argue whether prehistoric people made the distinction between temporary illness and ongoing conditions. Probably not in the way we do, but they noticed, they adapted. You can see it in the tools modified for different grips, in walking sticks carved with symbols, in the gentle way others wait for the slowest to catch up. You remember a man in the camp town with a twisted spine, couldn't run, couldn't hunt, but he remembered everything, every plant, every trail, every story. And so he became the camp's memory, a living archive in a body that creaked like old leather. You begin to notice it more now, the quiet pains others carry. A healer who winces when she bends. A child who always favors their left side. An elder who rests after every short walk, then pretends they were just admiring the clouds. You too find your place, not as the fastest, not as the strongest, but as the one who knows how to wrap a sprain, how to soothe a fever, how to make that slightly nauseating but weirdly effective root tea. Your pain hasn't vanished, but it's become part of you, like a scar or a memory. The camp's attitude toward lingering illness is refreshingly accepting. No pressure to get back to normal, no guilt for moving slowly. You help where you can, you rest when you must, and someone always sits beside you. One evening, a small boy asks if your limp means a spirit lives in your foot. You laugh, then nod solemnly. A very old spirit, you say, grumpy, but polite. He brings you a rock as an offering. The healer approves, pain becomes part of the stories. The way you explain why one hand can't grip as well, why that elder moves like he's negotiating with invisible tree roots, why your knee every so often clicks loudly enough to startle birds. It's not ignored, it's not cured, it's woven into the rhythm of life. You work differently, you rest more, you're slower, but still essential. The healer sometimes places warm stones on your joints, not for healing, but for comfort. You sit together, not speaking, watching the fire. Outside, the stars blink into existence. The wind hushes. Somewhere in the distance, an owl comments on the absurdity of existence. And you think maybe that's the point. Not to banish pain, not to defeat it, but to understand it, to live with it, to hold space for it without letting it take everything. You lie back on your mat. The fire crackles softly. You feel the weight of the day in your bones, but also the warmth of being here, being held, being known. You're not broken. You're just older, softer, wiser perhaps, a little creaky, but still here. And as sleep creeps in gentle and unhurried, you know that even in a world without doctors or hospitals, without charts or pills, there is still healing. In fire, in stories, in company, in the quiet acceptance that some pain stays, but so do you. Now let the fire fade from your mind. Let the echoes of footsteps across frost-covered earth grow soft and distant. Picture the glow of that ancient campfire, dimming its embers, pulsing gently like the slow, steady rhythm of breath. The aches of the day, the noise of the world, the sharp edges of thought, they all settle now. The healer's hum lingers in the air low and soothing, like a lullaby carried by the wind. You can almost feel the weight of the furs across your shoulders, warm and grounding. The scent of crushed herbs and smoke drifts in faint and comforting. Nothing is asked of you here. No chores, no walking, no explaining your pain to anyone. Just stillness, just breath. The stone tools are packed away. The camp is quiet. The stars overhead drift in and out of the clouds, watching gently but never judging. You are part of something older than memory, a human rhythm passed down through story, through kindness, through shared moments around firelight. Whatever pain you carry now, let it grow soft. Not gone, perhaps, but quieter. You've walked far. You've survived much. You've earned this rest. So close your eyes if they're not already closed. Feel the ground hold you. Let the story go silent. Let the dark be deep and kind. Sleep well, wanderer.